everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and today we have a very special debate. Our debate topic this house believe that human cloning should be legalized. We have our two great team from the government side, today's parliament, our honorable Prime Minister, Professor Rob, Professor David Schumacher, and Professor Ching. From the opposition side, we have our very famous opposition leader of the parliament, Professor David Smith, as well as Deputy Leader of the Parliament, Mr. Marshall. First, I would like to give chance Professor Rob.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This House believes that human cloning should be legalized. I'm not saying it shouldn't be regulated. Let me get to the point. The reasons for human cloning are, well, we start off with the fact that we couldn't stop it if we wanted. We're not a world government. So human cloning is going to occur on the planet whether we want it or not. It is always better when it comes to new technology to be conversant in it so you can understand both its benefits and its problems and not be hit by it because you haven't studied it at all. One of the predominant reasons for human cloning is to create alternative medical approaches to problems we can't solve now. For instance, the other day, or should say last night, I was watching a program about a bomb technician that had lost his eyesight in a foreign war. And as he was recovering, he got an illness and lost his hearing as well. They were able to get his hearing to kind of work again with cochlear implants, but his eyes are fundamentally gone. So we have a person that was serving his country that is now disabled as a result of that service, and we can't fix the problem because we can't regrow the part of his body that he lost. That could be true of a person that was hurt in an accident. It could be true of a child. It could be true of an adult. It could happen to us. And one of the predominant ways to develop a replacement, we could certainly use prosthetics, robotic arms, and artificial eyes. But the advantage to biological elements as opposed to robotic elements is they grow with us. That we look and are human. We don't look like we were put together out of a Tinker Toy set. So it allows us to do things we couldn't do before in terms of returning people that have served the country, served the government, or just simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and return them full life and productivity. Every couple has the right to have a child. A lot of couples are infertile, and the infertility treatments at best are 10% effective. Cloning would give us the ability to allow parents the right to have children that are from them. And cloning could give us the capability of assuring those children grow up without disease, grow up without defects, grow up with problems. We recognize that there are issues with that because there have been previous programs like eugenics, the German Aryan race programs that were designed to medically advance people far faster than evolution would allow. But that's where I'm saying that perhaps here we look at regulation and make a decision about what paths we want to take and what paths we don't. But if we don't study and understand the benefits and the problems, those decisions won't be made from knowledge. They'll be made from a lack of knowledge. And decisions made from a lack of knowledge tend to be bad decisions and not for the best interest of your people. Now, let's give an example. Looking back at that medical example I provided earlier, let's say we go to war and the country we go to war with, they have cloning, so they can replace their soldiers at a higher rate. If their soldiers are injured, they can return them to productive lives. And our soldiers find out about it. How many of our soldiers might go over to the other side after they're injured to get the medical treatments that we don't provide them? This is just to point out one of the implications of not allowing cloning that we probably aren't considering. It could make us far more vulnerable as a country. Another reason to have cloning is you could replace a lost child or a lost relative. Now, if we clone pets, I'm not saying in country, but we do that in the world. And wealthy families can get a copy of whatever lost pet that they had. What they discover, of course, is the knowledge and capability of that pet was lost, But as the new pet grows up, they can train that new pet, correct any errors they might have made in prior training, and end up with a pet that's actually better than the one that they had. And if you've ever lost a pet, it's pretty horrible. If you lose a child, it's far worse. Or a parent, it's far worse. The ability to at least provide people the option of replacing a lost loved one, or if Musk's experiments and others that are working in this area that allow the transfer of knowledge, the ability to create a workable clone of somebody that was valuable, either to you as a parent or to society as a whole. What if we could take a past doctor, a medical or physicist or a scientific that has been making great inroads that came down with an illness and passed too soon, and recreate them? Now, we've been talking about biological cloning. I want to add another element to this, and that's digital cloning. Because as we talk about biological cloning, there is no effort right now to ban digital cloning. And with the metaverse coming out, there's ever going to be every capability of creating a full digital clone of a digital twin, we call it, of a person. And unlike a biological clone where we can't transfer the knowledge from individual to individual, the digital clone we can, and we can do it at computer speed. So once you've created a digital clone, you can create an unlimited number of digital clones. And one, of course, the concerns with regard to biological clones is creating a clone, creating a group of clones that would become soldiers or workers, and they would become abused. They might be abused as a result. Well, we can do that with digital clones. Nobody's even talking about banning or regulating or controlling digital clones. What if your employer created a digital clone of you and decided, hey, we'd rather have them because we don't have to pay them a salary than you, lay you off, and your digital clone continues? Who controls, who regulates, who prevents that from happening? So what the government is arguing is not to ban clones, to allow cloning research, but to regulate the activity to make sure that it's focused on making the society better and not making the society worse, to guide the development effort away from things that would do harm and towards things that would help our soldiers, help our parents, help us progress as a society so the very best of us can go on and not only lead successful lives after injury or even after death, but can continue to contribute. And that the illnesses that we have today become just the illnesses of today, and they go away tomorrow. One final comment on pro-cloning. Whenever you see a medical result of a particular medication, there's a percentage of people where say, you've got a 0.02 chance of dying. Well, they get that percentage because some percentage of people that were tested on undoubtedly died. We don't talk about that part. With cloning, we could create a testing methodology that would go against a human model that wouldn't have to put people at risk. We could take the testing against the clones, solve the problem first, the digital twins, to do the initial analysis and do the final analysis of the clones, so no actual individual ever has to die or is put at risk. Those are the advantages of cloning. I'm not arguing that it shouldn't be regulated. The government's arguing it shouldn't be outlawed.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Now I request our opposition leader of this parliament, Professor David Smith.
Majority Leader, thank you for your opening remarks, and members of Parliament. We have talked about multiple types of cloning already, and the opposition has no challenges really as you look at digital cloning, and it is a terminology and an approach that we've talked about in prior debates, and one that has a lot of practicability. It could be a digital clone of a human, or it could be a digital clone of a manufacturing process, or a digital clone of our spacecraft we would like to eventually launch and take our nation to the moon. Makes a lot of sense to do that type of digital cloning. But as you begin to look at the human side of it, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And we first have to understand there's different types of cloning that we can do. There's recombinant DNA cloning, there's reproductive cloning, there's therapeutic cloning, and they're all really very different. We see today recombinant DNA cloning that's been done for decades and decades. It actually, if you go back and look at recombinant cloning it, over 50 years of history there. Uh, and you begin to see those elements. The Every day in a lab, you see that type of cloning happen as we begin to look at therapeutics. And that one's a very major type of cloning. You then get down into some of the other areas, such as therapeutic cloning, which is often called embryo cloning, and that is cloning which is could be used to grow a replacement organ or to generate skin, and that is one that has been real interesting in the regulatory environment around the world, and it's because often that one uses embryo cells as ways to begin to start the therapeutic cloning process. But the one that the majority talked a lot more about is reproductive cloning. And that's the type of cloning which is performed for the purpose of creating a duplicate copy of another organism. And it is really uh, accomplished by something that is called somatic cell nuclear transfer. And what that really means, really simple, is that it's transferring and cloning the DNA elements of the organism, but not necessarily all the other elements, not the things that go ahead and make the duplication that the majority leader is talking about, where we could clone a very intelligent scientist and where we can do elements like that. But you have to understand, as part of this debate, that cloning is not all equal. And then we throw digital cloning on top of it with yet an additional cloning type that complicates it even further. And you begin to see those elements coming into place and what we're going to do with them. You actually see some individual human cloning happens in the case of individual twins, identical twins. But this happens in the body. And it's a process that has so many different other elements to it that it is difficult for us to really get down to the nuance of it. So a couple of the places where we take exception to this type of cloning, and we think it should not be legalized, and it's not the basic cloning that I mentioned. It is not really the recombinant cloning. It's not really the therapeutic, really. It's the reproductive cloning, where we are trying to reproduce another centered being, where we're beginning to look at how can we begin to put these in place. And you know, you begin to look at it, and it cannot be the same if we're a human being, because it has to be supported for physiological reasons, psychology reasons, ethical reasons, environmental, social, physical. There's all the different things that we have to begin to understand as we look at this type of cloning to clone another human being. Uh, you go back and you look at the Dolly experiment, which happened. The Dolly experiment had over 247 failures before they got that. Then, as they did postmortem on Dolly, which was the cloned sheep, what we saw was the amount of genetic errors were tremendous. The amount of phenome errors, they were tremendous. And even with the years that have gone by since the Dolly cloning experiment, you have not seen that type of organism cloning taken at scale at all. And then we see so many challenges with it, so many medical challenges, science challenges, social, economic challenges with that. I believe it's going to be a long time before you get there. And very few scientists are eager really to initiate experiments on human cloning today. And, once legalized, human cloning could go into a full-fledged place of killing dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of
Mhm.
embryos every day as we look at how we begin to regulate. The majority says we'll regulate it. Well, you're going to still have the same consequences of the same type of cloning there. If human cloning is legalized and practiced regularly, you're going to soon see hospitals will be full of babies with genetic birth defects that were cloned. They're going to be dependent on respirators because of things. Brain damage will be a common occurrence. And you will see these children without the basic elements that we see of a normal childbirth. Uh, the comment was made earlier is that uh, parents who cannot have children, and I have an adopted son, would be able to clone. No, we would be able to clone ourselves, and not a new centric being that has their own personality, that has their own elements in it. So even those type of arguments, you know, the same thing. If I were to go and create a clone of a brand new baby, would they have a normal physical appearance, or could they have genetic abnormality, autism, epilepsy, all the others? You go and one of the experts on this at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, Gerald Scatter, he actually says if you look at all the data on animal cloning, demonstrates exceptionally high rates of fetal loss, abortion, neonatal deaths, and many cloned animals have devastating birth defects. This is one of the leading scientists, and seeing where their experiments have gone wrong. So, should we legalize human cloning? Not at this point. Should we look at regulating human cloning? Definitely, because of all the challenges that are associated with it. And there are benefits of types of cloning, but not a full reproductive cloning of the animal, of the human. And you see the elements. Some of the questions we often hear are, can parts of cloning contribute to the medical sector? We agree with the majority that if we look at the appropriate type of regenerative healthcare, and I want to use the word regenerative healthcare as opposed to cloning, because I might be able to regrow the retina in my eye, but that's not cloning a new human being. I might be able to use regenerative healthcare as a mechanism to produce new skin after a burn, but that is not cloning a human being. And the question is, does it violate human rights? In some ways it does. If I want to clone 25 of me, does that generate the human rights of those around me? Does that generate the human rights of the 25 clones I make? God, I would hate to see 25 of me around me. But you can see that does put really a ethical question in place on whether the full capability of cloning a human being is appropriate. What we as the opposition says, there are types of cloning, particularly digital cloning, that makes sense. But we firmly believe that the right to legalize full human cloning, the world is just not ready for it this time, and the science is not ready for it at this time.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Now I request today's Minister of the Parliament, our Health Ministers, Professor David Schumacher.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to address the Parliament. I want to take up on the two that have talked previously. My illustrious leader, Rob, I think, outlined the argument quite well on why human cloning needs to be kept legal. And I as well agree that that does not mean not regulating it. As a matter of fact, I think regulation is important. But let's talk about a couple of fundamental things before I talk about the argument from the opposition. So first off, if you're going to make something legal, there has to be a demand for it before there's even a discussion of whether it should be legal or not. And there's ramifications to making something illegal. We've seen this time and time again. In my particular country, during the period of alcohol prohibition, I think there was a very good example of something that there was a high demand for in society. And because the government had made it illegal, then that demand went underground to get it taken care of, to satisfy that need. But that's all based on the need. So what happens when something goes underground? Well, nothing good. It becomes invisible, for one thing. You can't have open discussions about it. In this case, the manufacturer of alcohol then had no safeguards. It could vary randomly, could cause problems. I mean, just the fact that when you push something underground, you lose control of it. So it needs to be legal from the standpoint so that it can be regulated and have open discussions, because it's not just the production of the product, it's also the discussion that goes around it. If you're being able to discuss, compete, to apply innovation against it, that all needs to be done out in the open. So the key point I would have there is keeping something legal and keeping it transparent as part of the regulation of how something new is developed, or having conversations for how to develop. So a big part of that is ethical issues. If something is forbidden, then it's automatically, in many people's eyes, unethical. If it's not forbidden, then there can be an open discussion about that as well. And that becomes very important as to the direction in which something like cloning should take. And that's actually the second point of my argument is we don't know really what that direction is. Cloning is in its infancy, and there may be a demand for it. And if there is, then can scientists, engineers, innovators be able to meet the demands that society wants from this? And if they can, then can it be done in a way that satisfies the government umbrella of observation and regulation? So one of the things to really consider is we don't know what benefits human cloning can bring to us. David Smith talked quite well about the different types of cloning, and that's what we know now. But if we were to make it illegal, all those things would stop, and we wouldn't be able to reap advantages of items that we're not even discussing currently. So some of the disadvantages that were brought up, I think the main one that I made note of was high failure rate and genetic errors among clones. As I said, cloning's in its infancy, so you're going to expect that you start with a less than perfect product, and then if the science is there to perfect it, you make that better over time. So making something legal, making something regulated allows for it to be discussed in the court of ethics, allows it to be discussed in the court of public opinion, and allows us to be able to reap benefits. For example, what are the things that we can learn from cloning is how to protect against some of these errors. Dolly the sheep was mentioned by the opposition. Dolly the sheep was created from a 6-year-old sheep, a Dorset sheep, I believe. And the postmortem on Dolly showed that when that Dolly died early, and maybe one of the reasons that Dolly died early is that her telomere length for an animal of her age was much, much shorter than what it would normally be. That infers, and many scientists have inferred, that because Dolly was cloned from a six-year-old animal, that would be the reason for the shorter telomere length. They started shorter than what they would in the quote-unquote natural environment. So that's valuable knowledge to learn. We talked about therapeutic cloning, and we talked about cloning for specific medical reasons. One of the research processes that's going on now has to do with stem cell cloning. Well, those stem cells are cloned in a matter of hours, at the most days, from the time of their original generation. So we were able to learn that these processes had to be done early only because there have been ongoing experiments. Stem cells, the type that are being cloned, can be used to regrow organs, as we've talked about, and other things, but we're talking about keeping the knowledge open so that we can continue to progress and work on things that we don't even understand today. And I'll leave it there for right now.
Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Now I request Deputy Leader of the Parliament, Mr. Marshall.
I'm deputy leader of the opposition.
Opposition, sir. Yes.
Yes. I don't want to stage a coup d'état here. So be careful.
I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we're in a democracy, and we honor that, and that's why we're having this debate in the Parliament. Following my leader's approach, I think there's several arguments and that your minister made and you made that are significant pieces of contribution to what our discussion is. But and with all due respect, as the opposition, we tend to disagree with some of your points, both politically, but also in a science-based approach and an ethics-based approach. Just because someone can do it doesn't mean you should do it or you should make it legal. So to give classic examples from history, because you can go and use Zyklon B to kill human beings doesn't mean it should be legalized. So the use of Zyklon B to kill and slaughter and create a genocide doesn't mean it should be done or be legalized. The same component of using invading people because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, as we see in the current state of affairs in the world. Bringing this to the fore, I also want to bring out more specifically to cloning, as my leader has pointed out, different types of cloning exist, and that means that we need to differentiate between them. Cloning for, as the term is used, for getting a new retina might be wonderful and be conditional. Does it ethically cause any problems? We on the opposition do not see that, but it should be regulated, just like we regulate medical procedures in this country. In 2004, a group led by Woo-Suk Kwon of Seoul National University in South Korea published a paper in the journal Science, which is a well-known and renowned publication around the world, in which some of our own scientists have published, in which it claimed to have created a cloned human embryo in a test tube. However, independent scientific committee later found no proof to support the claim, and in January 2006, Science announced that Huang's paper had been retracted. Now, that's getting ahead of the clone, as we say here. From a technical perspective, cloning humans and other primates is much more difficult than in cloning other mammals. And here, I think the key that our side is saying is we shouldn't allow the cloning of human beings. Even animals can be cloned. We've been talking about Dolly, but one of the reasons that humans are difficult to clone is that two proteins that are essential to cell division, known as spindle proteins, are located very close to the chromosomes in primate eggs. That's why it's difficult to clone primates. Maybe not sheep or chickens, but certainly primates. Consequently, removal of the egg's nucleus to make room for the donor nucleus also removes the spindle proteins interfering with cell division. That's probably why we see a high failure rate and lots of claims, such as we saw in South Korea, that are actually fraudulent and not real. So already there's a history of misinformation and disuse of information to try to get other benefits from this concept of cloning. It's not just about cloning. Should it be legal to clone another human being? It's about what is the purpose and the intent of cloning. And just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it or allow it. I don't think anybody in this parliament wants to see nuclear warfare. We have people out, though our country does not own nuclear weapons, I'm sure we all would be very happy if no one used a nuclear weapon. They exist. Just because other countries have them doesn't mean we need to have them. So the question is, what is ethically correct? What is scientifically possible? And if it is scientifically possible, should it be allowed? Right now, it currently is not possible. And the likelihood of it occurring, as my leader has pointed out, and as the opposition has pointed out, is not likely to occur in the near future. Certainly because of the spindle protein issue. And having reached out to scientists around the world and participated in many conferences on this issue, as the Minister of Science for our, or the head of the science group for our side of the ledger, we have found that it's not likely to occur in the near future. So why bring this up as an issue? Because it could occur. But if it does occur, what are the consequences? And the consequences are really, really significant. Like anything else, it could be used for the detriment of all our citizens and all our freedoms. Think of this. Would you want to clone Putin? Would you want to clone Adolf Hitler? Would you want to clone Stalin or their descendants? I don't think so. I don't think you want those people to be your leaders. That's why we have a democracy. Do we want to clone ourselves? I don't think so. Why not? For the very simple ethical reason. We have life, liberty in our country as individuals. If we start cloning ourselves, are we individuals? Becomes an ethical question. And another ethical question comes to mind once you start cloning people. What happens if your clone kills another clone? How are we going to deal with that? Is that a human being, or is it not or is it simply a clone? Do we have a separate set of laws for clones or for people or citizens? Is a clone a citizen? And how do you determine that? Because they're not really created through natural selection and process. So there's a lot of questions out there. And I think, as our illustrious leader has said on the opposition, this is not a concept whose time has come. And though the government is saying, yes, we need to regulate it, we have a hard time regulating right now people coming across our borders with all sorts of problems, drugs, illegal immigration, all sorts of things that our forces are struggling with and clogging our courts with. We need to free up our capabilities to deal with the day-to-day issues that our citizens out there are facing. Our citizens are facing issues now, right now, high inflation, other issues, jobs, and healthcare issues. To add more healthcare because you got to take care of a clone. Who's paying for that? Are clones going to be taxpayers? And if they are, how do we know that that's going to occur? There's a lot of issues here that the government is not bringing to the table and has to be addressed. I'm sure they will try to address them, but the issue is ethics at the end of the day. I'm asking my fellow citizens out there, along with our leader on the opposition, do you want to see clones? If you want to see clones and you want to see duplicates of yourselves, or so-called duplicates, who will probably have a lot of issues with them, are you prepared to deal with those issues? Are you prepared to take your hard-earned tax dollars, give them to the government so we can manage more clones or more so-called people, but they're clones? Are they real people? What rights do they have? Do they have the same rights that you and I have? I think many of you out there would have to think twice about that before you would give consent to the government to bring cloning into the stable for human beings. And as we said, the good news is it's not likely to occur in the near future because of the spindle protein issue. Will right now, as another part of the science-based, removal of an egg's nucleus does not result in loss of spindle proteins, but in addition, some dyes and ultraviolet light used to remove the egg's nucleus can damage the primate cell and prevent it from growing anyway. So there's a lot of barriers to cloning to occur in the real world. And to talk about it, we need to consider it. It's a good debate. We need to have this conversation. But I think, fellow citizens out there, please ensure, write to your representatives, write to the Prime Minister, and tell them we don't need cloning now. We need to devote our resources to better issues like our own healthcare, not clone healthcare, and make sure, yes, use cloning to get me a new retina. Yes, use cloning to get me a new appendage. That's and that can be regulated as the leadership has indicated, as our leader has spoken about. But we need to keep human cloning at bay, because once that starts, then your tax dollars are going to have to fund those clones, and we don't know that they're going to be productive and be able to actually contribute tax dollars to our government and to our base. So I respectfully request all the citizens out there, pick up your computer, your cell phone, and text, write, get on the blogs, and tell the government, stay out of our healthcare system with cloning humans. Clone me an appendage, but don't clone me a duplicate.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Now I request Member of the Parliament, Professor Ching.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Let me correct one thing. Okay, I'm very much into this thing. Okay, so 2 years ago there were a couple monkey cloned. Okay, so they are able to clone almost human. Okay, all this other animal dollar is way past, in the past. So let us look into the future, not to be held back by the past. Okay, so I'm going to give a futuristic view based on pretty much on knowledge, on logic. Okay, first thing we need to talk about is bioethics. Okay, when human are cloned, death will no longer be excused, will no longer excuse one from evil deeds. Okay, many people who commit evil deeds because they think they can get death will relieve them from the responsibility of their evil deeds. Okay, therefore, this idea of even the possibility of permanent life, it will change people's perception about committing evil. Okay, they will try to accumulate goodness. Okay. Okay, so basically, permanent life, even the idea of permanent life and the cloning will greatly reduce evil. Okay, so this is, in my opinion, this cloning is intended by nature. Okay, and also all these animals, plants, good animal, good plants, they have already been cloned. Okay. In other words, what we're really looking for is this. Okay. The goal of life, we should see it like this. The goal of life is to determine whether life is worth living. Okay, after you live the whole life, then you know if the life is positive or negative. If it's positive, it should be cloned. If it's negative, then you should probably get married and get some, children who are better than you. They might get a chance to have a life that's worth cloning. Okay. Not only that, that's life. Okay. Also death. The purpose of death is to get rid of old ideas. You see, have new hardware come in and to absorb new software, new culture. Okay, people, there's some people, if they continue to live, they will hold the world back, especially the leaders. Okay, if they live for a long time, they hold the culture back. Okay, so death is the way to get rid of them. Okay, so we need this revival of new ideas. Give young people a chance. Okay, to have new ideas. Also, I have some friends. Sade, Dayu. I would love to have a 10 clone. But then these guys, they're so valuable. Any idea, any problem I have, I just give to one of them. They're going to solve them. So this is a personal preference, you see. So another thing, one of my best friends is Dr. Pano Zavos, who is considered the father of human cloning. Okay. Also, in Oregon, there's a guy who really know how to clone. Okay, he cloned the 2 monkeys 2 years ago. So I think they have no problem cloning human. Okay, as when I go to party, I see some. This is my private life. I could go to party, I see some kids look exactly like movie stars. I suspect they are actually doing it. Okay. And the movie star, those people, they are the most valuable people. Everybody loves them. They love themselves. So I guess they don't care, what the government say. Okay. They just go ahead and put the money and do it. You see. So basically, I just, find this topic is, very interesting for me personally, and for people. I have a new view on this thing, not looking to the past, not being held back by the past, but to really have a futuristic view about this cloning. So I'm very much for my friend, Dr. Zavos. He's got bashed by the society. So I would not recommend that we go out openly too much for cloning. But just privately, I would say from logic, this is a way to see this from knowledge point of view. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Professor Ching. Now I request Professor David Smith, as you have still, you can add 7 minutes for constructive speech and 3 minutes for closing remarks. Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you. This has been
Honorable-
a very
Honorable opposition leaders, from point of informations inside our parliaments, like we have many people, they are observing your show and they have some point of information. I request both of the prime minister and opposition leader, if you respond, your people question answer, it will be best, because they vote you to being a prime minister and opposition leader, and if you care about them, that will be fantastic.
Well, Sharif, thank you. And in my opening remark, I tried to touch on some of those, and I will revisit them in the closing remarks here. The questions is, what is the benefit of legalizing it? And the majority leader has tried to put some on the place, but human cloning at this point just doesn't make sense there. Can it contribute in the medical sector? If I go and put on philosophical hat, maybe it can, but when you look at hard science, today, human cloning is opposed to regenerative healthcare doesn't really contribute in the medical system because of many of the reasons that my colleague Marshall has talked about during his. It's animal cloning, a new technology. No, it has gone back. The attempts have gone back, but they have not been successful as we see. And we've seen in attempts where that has been done extremely premature aging, other elements like that. Does it cloning violate human rights? Well, I almost think a full person cloning has the potential to violate human rights, which is one of the reasons this house is looking against it. You know, some of the cons of human cloning. Human cloning might cause people to age faster instead of slower. You know, as it begins to age, you see that go, and you know, it happens. The telomeres and others get shorter faster, which kind of hurts there. And if genetic age implanting doesn't happen to the human geo, then providing these embryos, like we've talked about, could lead to new genetic diseases, particularly raising the risk for premature death. Human cloning would actually change how we perceive the individual, which I think goes back to the question is why is cloning morally wrong? Because it would change how you perceive them. You know, if we created 2, 3, 20 individuals with the same genetic profile, each would have their own brains and their bodies, but are they really the same family members as others? Could they still develop unique characteristics? Then are they a clone even more? You begin to see those elements. And, you know, are they going to be treated differently within society? Will it create a new social class reserved only for those who are duplicates of high intellect, high social position? Would they be genetic duplicates of authentic humans, or would we clone people to become slaves and to be able to work in our farms and do the jobs that we don't want to do? You know, those are some of the ethical issues as we begin to look at human cloning. You know, the other part here is if you look at debate globally, because as the majority leader has said, we're only a small country. Would human cloning only be available to the very wealthy? Probably at first as well. It's only with those with enough money to take advantage of the benefits. And there's a general rule in humankind that says that those who have the power do whatever it takes to maintain it. And you see that being very possible here. And you know, this would even help contribute further to our social economic divides in place. You know, even with this science, because those with money can afford more features, more add-ons, more processes than those who struggle to put food on their table. You know, human cloning would face the same dangers as animal cloning. You know, it requires well over 100 embryos to create one viable animal clone in most circumstances. Wow, you know, what do I do with the ones that aren't viable as we look at cloning? That's why this process is illegal in most parts of the world today. And we see that. Yeah, human cloning. And I do want to talk about full individual organizational human cloning. Will always have spiritual, moral, and ethical consequences attached to it, whether in our belief system or not. There always will be physical risks to humans associated with artificial cloning process as well. You know, you see that going, and we will have that forever in our process. There have been attempts at human cloning, and they really have been mostly unsuccessful. Even with the ones where we're looking at it as cloning less than the human body, we see that. And human cloning could really contaminate our DNA diversity. And you see that just really there. Just a couple of final points there. You know, if I go back and look at human cloning could lead to exploitation, The Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity suggests that one of the most significant disadvantages is it would lead to new exploitation of women. And scientists would need to manufacture enough clone embryos to create a sufficient number of stem cell lines that are viable. And women would be the ones who would need to be injected with enough medication for them to ovulate rapidly and produce the eggs. And you see that, and boy, that has its own things there. And so human cloning would initially target women who are struggling financially. And human cloning creates people as a means to the end. Wow. I just really want that one to think in there. It's really unethical to view humans, regardless of their age, as a means to an end. It just doesn't work. When we start the research on human cloning, that's exactly what we're doing. Activating cells that are still part of the human experience. Well, when do I actually process a human clone? Do I need to do a human clone early in my life cycle? Can I do one when I graduate first time from college? Do I do one when I hit my 40s? Or do I want to do a clone in my hundreds that capture the wisdom, and maybe a clone that brings me back to my 20s through genetic manipulation? Can I do that? So the opposition's feeling is no, we should not legalize full human being cloning at this time. Do we want to look at the other options as they contribute to the good of society? Yes, but with not simple regulation, but regulation and oversight to make sure that we do the things in our great nation that are in the best interest of our citizens, that are in the best interest of how we want to take our place in the world stage. And this world stage is where the real element of human cloning will be decided. I do want to go back to one thing the majority leader said. Digital cloning, we already started projects in that. Digital cloning makes sense. So that's where we stand, and appreciate the consideration as we go forward with this last part of the debate.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Opposition Leader of the Parliament. Now I request Honorable Minister of the Prime Minister of the Parliament for his closing remarks.
Well, and thank you for allowing the closing remarks. We heard the arguments of the opposition, which largely have to do with technology can be used for bad things, therefore we shouldn't do it. And of course that kind of an argument goes back to the Middle Ages, where witches, who were the medical experts of the time, unlike the doctors of the time that thought drilling holes in heads and letting out what demons was the way to deal with headaches, were the medical practitioners that were using medicines, and they were burned at the stake because they went against conventional knowledge. And it wasn't until years later that research was allowed, and we discovered that yes, plants and minerals can be used to address diseases and lead to longer, healthier lives. Cloning has that same potential. Like anything else, cloning can be good or bad. One of the people in the audience asked, why is cloning morally wrong? Inherently, it's not. There is no scientific process that is morally wrong or morally right. What makes a process morally wrong or right is how it's used, not the process itself. Nuclear energy isn't morally wrong. Dropping a nuclear bomb on a large population center is. The gasoline isn't morally wrong. Using it to pollute the planet so the population dies, you might argue that is. And covering up those problems certainly is. How would cloning violate human rights? It doesn't by nature. I mean, and it really kind of depends on your definition of humans. And this is something that we really think we should consider as we regulate the technology, because we should make sure that cloning doesn't violate human rights. I mean, we'll give you an example of how cloning could violate human rights. So well, you probably watched Star Wars. The Clone Wars was a series in it where thousands of soldiers were cloned and used to go to war against thousands of robots. Not too sure that's the future we want. Should probably stay away from that. But just because we don't do clones doesn't mean we wouldn't have the robots. So in the end, cloning isn't a violation of human rights. But if we considered clones humans and we turned them into slaves, that would be a violation of human rights. So it really depends on how you use the technology, what the outcome of that technology is. Another observer asked if animal cloning is a new technology. It's not. It goes back decades, back to Dolly, which both our side and the opposition brought up. Animal cloning is a thing now, and you can clone your pets. We do need to work a bit more on assuring people get what it is they expect, because often when people clone a pet and pay $100,000 or more for that pet, up to $250,000 for that pet, they're expecting to get the pet back, and they don't. That they get a puppy that looks identical to the pet, but much like you have identical twins in people, and those twins grow up in different ways and cease being identical the farther apart that they are. The same thing happens with cloned pets. The pet grows up differently, and it can be better if you focus on it. It can be worse if you don't. It really requires how you come up with a pet. And right now, we are not at the scientific level where we could take a scientist or a politician and create a digital reproduction of them and transfer their knowledge, their spirit, their whatever into the new body and have it perform as it did. But I did mention we are very close to being able to do that in the digital arena. And if we can do it digitally, there is a chance we can pretty good chance that eventually we can do it biologically. And the question will always remain, should we? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. But if we ban a particular technology, we don't learn about it. We don't learn about the good or the bad. We can't get the benefits. And if another country uses the technology against us, we have no knowledge of how to defend against that technology, which is problematic for a government that is supposed to be keeping its citizens safe. When we talk about cloning used for medical capability, don't people have a right to have children? I mean, certainly they have an option to adopt, and that really should be the preferred method of doing it, because we have a lot of children that need parents. Certainly a fan of adoption, but shouldn't our citizens have a right to a biological child if they have the wherewithal to afford one, even if they are infertile? Shouldn't that be a fundamental right? So the question really goes back when you're talking about cloning is, what are the rights you want your citizens to have? Do they have a right to 2 arms and 2 legs? Do they have a right to be able to see? Do they have a right to be able to hear? Do they have a right to be able to live longer than a normal human lifespan? I would argue that those are rights. If it may be we can't provide for that now, but we should be working to allow it. A soldier that loses his eyesight and his hearing serving the country shouldn't be crippled and live in darkness for the rest of his or her life. I believe strongly in our ability to be able to restore the people, at least the people we harm, to full capability. A police officer serving the country who is injured trying to pull somebody out of a fire, we should heal them. In the United States, they had thousands of people working on the buildings after 9/11 that contracted cancer and died because of that selfless work. That shouldn't happen. With cloning, we can address many of these problems. And if we ban it, we won't do the research. We will never get the benefit. The opposition argues that cloning could be used for bad things. It could be used for horrible things. And they're absolutely right. Could is a possibility. It is our goal to make that not a possibility, to regulate it to a point where cloning is used to help our population, not hurt it. We are not standing up here and saying that cloning should happen without controls. We clearly opened with the idea that there needs to be serious controls over this, for the very least of which we don't want people abusing clones or treating clones as something other than They should be. We shouldn't be building a society of abusers. That would be absolutely wrong. And building a clone army to go attack our neighbors, not a fan of that either. But what if our neighbors build a clone army? What if they go to war with us and we are now defending? At least it should be an option. Certainly not an option of this administration, because that problem will occur decades in the future. But if a future administration wants to save their citizens, they should at least have the option of being able to do so if that option exists. And if we ban it, it won't. Looking at Ukraine and nuclear weapons, recall that Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons with an agreement with Russia that said that Russia would not attack them as a result. And we see how that turned out. Had they retained their nuclear weapons, there is little doubt that Russia would have left them alone now. No nuclear war, no risk of nuclear war. Russia's the one that is stating that they are hiding in bunkers and going to launch nuclear weapons or biological weapons or chemical weapons soon, because Ukraine doesn't have any defense. The technology, if they'd retained it, would have allowed them to have that defense, and thousands of their citizens wouldn't be homeless now. Millions now, 4 million citizens are now homeless because of their decision to walk away from nuclear weapons as a result of an agreement that Russia clearly breached. We need to provide our future government with the capability of being able to address future medical, future biological, and future military problems that may arise. So this administration believes that cloning should not be banned. It should be regulated. We should study it, we should understand it, and we should make our decisions based on knowledge, not based on fear. The government rests.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister of this Parliament, for your excellent debate. Actually, today's debate is very valuable, especially for our developing world people, because I'm sure from this debate you can get many interesting information, both from the government and the opposition side, especially for human cloning. Those who are engaging with the research and research related activities, and I believe you can get a lot of evidence and a lot of information how you can do research and what is the benefit and advantage and disadvantage of the human cloning. So this is our objective, and side by side I want to declare some of the good news that World Talent Economy Forum, we are growing very fast, and all of the credit goes to our honorable speakers, those who regularly join in World Talent Economy Forum and those who support World Talent Economy Forum. We are developing our core team. Anybody can join in our team. Anyone from our speakers, from our audience, they can join in our team, because we are engaging with the human related activities. Lot of the real-time projects we are engaging right now. In Malaysia, almost 6 million people's communities from the mosque, they joined with World Talent Economy Forum. They are collaborating with us. This Ramadan, we have a special iftar, and Honorable Prime Minister also join in this iftar. So that is one of the achievements. And those who want to change human life, they can propose through World Talent Economy Forum. In India, next year February, we have our conference. It is a Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. We are inventing real technology with our scientists in Japan, and we are transferring this technology to the European Union in this challenging moment. And all of the Nikola Tesla technology we are uplifting. We are working with Tesla Museum. So this will be the great effort from World Talent Economy Forum, and I want to give special thanks to Professor Adrian, because he supports us a lot. And this February, not only it will not be the conference, already 30,000 people is 15 village people, they join with World Talent Economy Forum, and we have to develop their ecosystem, sustainable ecosystem. So those who have a real solution, those who really love to contribute for human being, World Talent Economy Forum is the best place. I just give you two examples, but I can assure you, like from the developing world, millions of people from Bangladesh, from India, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, Vietnam, China, Middle East, everywhere, many community from this developing world, they are joining, and we need real project. Any kind of projects you have in your mind and you believe you can change human life. Maybe there is a water related problem, you can solve water related project. There is a sustainable development related project, so you can do that. There is a educational needs, you can help the student community. That is our objective, and I want to give thanks to all of our speakers because all of your tremendous support. Because of your support of last 2 years, I can remember Professor Rob, actually our second day speaker until today, like he is supporting us. I want to give special thanks to him, even all of our speaker, Professor David Smith, Professor David Schumacher, Professor Ching, Mr. Marshall, everyone. I want to give thanks. Now we this is the real time that we have to take a lot of initiative, and I believe World Talent Economy Forum is the right place that you can change human life. Many countries prime ministers. 4 April I have a special meeting with ICT Minister Bangladesh. Many ministries, many governments, peoples, and the corporate body from this developing world, they believe that your communication, your open dialogue give them a real strategy. So one and only problem we are solving right now, we are developing a research and knowledge based ecosystem, and anyone from our speakers, from our audience, they can be the partner of this ecosystem. Thank you, Professor Rob, Professor David Schumacher, Professor David Smith, Professor Ching, and Professor in Practice, Professor Marshall. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye bye and take care. This is excellent debate. Excellent debate. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.